America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Toni Angelini with the Job Creators Network. Today, we are honored to be joined by Frank Lavin. Frank served as Undersecretary for International Trade at the U.S. Department of Commerce in the George H.W. Bush administration. Lavin was previously U.S. Ambassador to Singapore, where he helped negotiate the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. During his time serving in the Bush and Reagan administrations, he worked in the Department of Commerce, Department of State, National Security Council, and the White House. Frank, welcome to Main Street Matters. I am so excited to talk to you today. I don't even know where to start.
Toni, thanks for having me on. It's always great. I love chatting about current events, chatting about policy, chatting about history. So delighted to be here.
Well, speaking of current events, I would say that your resume makes you overqualified to talk about, what is currently going on, and we will definitely get into all of that. But it's not often that you get to speak with someone who has, such a firsthand experience, historically speaking. And I would love for you to give our audience a little bit of insight into your experience in the Reagan and Bush administrations, and then maybe tie it into modern day and how you think that they are similar to Donald Trump.
Well, I'm grateful for the chance to serve. I always viewed public service as a calling, and that what kind of outcomes drive what kind of society, what kind of country you have. So what I liked about Reagan and Bush is all of them adhered to that sort of general view to say, let's think about where we want to go as a country. Let's think about our ultimate goal here, and then what kind of policies are going to get us there. If you want more kids to graduate from high school, you better be open to school choice. You better be open to online solutions. You better be open to competition in the education space. But the more paths you give high school students for a successful outcome, the more successful outcomes you're going to get. So I like that kind of policy rationalism that did help America get to better outcomes. And I'll tell you, I worked most closely, I think, with President Reagan, but all three of them were genial professionals. All of them knew that they had to build a team, they had to lead a team, and being pleasant gets you a lot more further in life than being unpleasant. So all three of them were great guys to work with, and I'm very privileged to have that opportunity.
I love hearing that because, you only sort of see what image was constructed at the time in the media or in, second, third, hand accounts in books, after the fact. But I always, especially with George W. Bush, there was just always something about him, to me personally, that just he seemed to be a genuine human, like you could get stuck in an elevator with him and, actually have a conversation.
I think that's very fair. And I wonder if some of that strength comes from that background as governor, meaning if you're governor of a state, every problem that state comes to you, the fire chief of Dallas says we need more fire trucks. You've got to listen and hear what he says. You've got to think through the fire department budget and how the state's supposed to help. The point is every problem is a legitimate problem. Every point of view is a legitimate point of view. And you've got to kind of adjudicate. You probably can't make everybody happy, but everybody's coming to you to say, Governor, we've got a situation here, and can you take a look at this? So you need a team and a mechanism for doing that. And you better be basically pleasant about it because everybody's looking to you for leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I truly believe that some of the best presidents we've had in this country have previously been governors for exactly that reason. Because at least as a governor, you have more of a sort of a direct firsthand experience of how your constituents are being impacted by the policies that you're promoting. I worked in Governor Christie's both of his terms, and one of the highlights and a very proud time in my life was I was in charge of Sandy recovery efforts for some of our hardest hit municipalities in New Jersey. And you learn a lot about people in when they're going through something, and you also learn a lot about the government and how very much it can be in the way of progress and success. And the California residents are unfortunately learning that right now in real time about, their EPA or environmental regulations may have had the best of intentions, but now they're all looking around like, okay, so we're never going to be able to rebuild the homes on the land that we already own. So governors do have that sort of opportunity, I think, more so than a senator, or, no shade to our congressional representatives, but I think it's a little bit more impactful when you're in a gubernatorial seat. But so, there's so much going on now in sort of modern day times. And I mean, the tariff insanity, I have to tell you, I woke up this morning to a potential 200% tariff on European wines being imported in. And I'm really starting to feel personally victimized by the tariff insanity. So
Yeah.
what is your perspective on
Well, look,
what's going on?
In general, tariffs are not good news. In general, tariffs are a tax. Tariffs impose a burden on the economy, a burden on businesses, a burden on consumers. It feeds into inflation. It reduces competition. It reduces consumer choice. So in general, what presidents of all parties have been trying to do over 80 years is reduce tariffs, trim them down, and you can hopefully get to zero in the right kind of free trade agreement. But in any event, try to move the right way to keep reducing them. And boy, the U.S. has had an enormous prosperity. Now, there's one group that won't necessarily enjoy that prosperity, which is if you're in a competitive industry or an industry that's under pressure anyhow, steel being maybe the most prominent example of that. That might be a group that says, no, we like tariffs because it protects our jobs. So most presidents said, look, what we want is every industry's got to stand on its own 2 feet. If part of your industry is no longer globally competitive, we have to find a way to adjust it so you're making the kind of steel or alloys or substitutes that is globally competitive. So it's really quite a reversal from that, I would say, decades of progress to where we are now, which is let's have a trade war. Let's not differentiate between some countries, in my view, that are really malfeasant, like China, and countries that are good trading partners, like Europe and Canada and Mexico. Let's not differentiate. Let's put tariffs on the UK, put tariffs on Australia. To say, boy, you're picking all the fights you can pick, and you're not bringing jobs back to the U.S. These numbers about a new investment in the U.S. are consistent to the same numbers we had last year. There's always investment in the U.S., but there's no spike in investment because of tariffs. In fact, what it does is freeze economic activity. It depresses the auto industry. It hurts auto workers. So I would say, watch out. The best use of tariffs we saw with Reagan and Bush was actually the incremental minor use as sort of a threat or a warning or to help a particular problem could occasionally make sense. But broad tariffs on the whole economy was just bad news.
I wonder, to your point that the incremental tariffs are ultimately what were effective then, and it seems that at the end of the day, that is what we may land on here, but because of modern day media, social media, X, Twitter, we're seeing so much of the like in real time jockeying back and forth between the positions. And part of me wonders if this is just like we're just too in the weeds of like how the sausage is being made right now, and we're all sort of running around like our hair is on fire. Yeah. And if that is more a side effect of just the media environment that we live in, or if it is a sort of an indication that the Trump administration is all over the place, or maybe a combination of both.
I think that's a good observation, Tony. Look, when trade improves and the economy improves, you have overwhelming benefits for American society, but there can be a small segment that is under economic pressure, like we talked about steel. But the point is, social media rewards unhappiness. It empowers the angry person whether it's legitimate or not, fair or not, it gives that person as much of a voice. And the people who use, there's something like 6 times as many American workers use steel than make steel. So if you lower the price of steel, you're hurting that one guy who makes steel, but you're helping the 6 who use steel. Auto industry, appliance industry, construction industry all need steel. But nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I've got my a new building project in front of me. I guess I'm going to tweet about it. But people do wake up in the morning saying, son of a gun, the price of steel is down. That means our company's not going to expand, and my job security is maybe threatened. And they do tweet about their anger and unhappiness. So bad news outpaces good news in this kind of electronic media, digital media age, and no doubt about it.
You referenced steel, rightfully so, a few times. But what about we've got China is sort of. I think they're kind of laying back right now and waiting to see how it all shakes out. But there have been some countermeasures with coal and liquid natural gas. Easy for me to say. How do you assess the effectiveness of Trump's strategy against some of China's countermeasures, and I mean more globally, what is ultimately the impact that this will have on our relationship with China?
Right. Well, what's puzzling for me is most other trading partners of the U.S. have the same complaints about China as the U.S. has. And China is this ascendant economic power, and it does pursue very aggressive, sometimes predatory pricing policy. So I think, to my mind, there is a legitimate complaint. But the Europeans have the same problem. Southeast Asia has the same problem. Australia has the same problem. The point is, in that kind of environment, the U.S. has an opportunity to make friends and to work with like-minded nations. So my view is there's an opportunity for Trump to pursue, say, an electric vehicle free trade agreement with Europe, because we're both concerned about the inroads that the less expensive Chinese EVs might make in our markets. Well, let's consolidate. Let's work on a larger market and capture some of those efficiencies for ourselves. So what's surprising to me is that Trump's policies, at least to date, he's only 1 month into it, but at least to date, it has been 100% stick and no carrot. His policy is entirely, let me tell you what I'm unhappy about. Let me tell you who's being mean to me and how I'm going to be mean to them. And you say, oh, all right, that's sort of natural. It's sort of human nature. But by the way, if some of that was the carrot, if some of that was, by the way, there's some folks who are playing by the rules, and we want to enhance our ability to play with them and work with them, that could offset some of the damage being done by being 100% stick. So I don't know if he's going to pivot. He did have some openings and some initiatives his first term. He had a digital free trade agreement with Japan. So he did launch some things that were more carrot oriented, less stick. He hasn't done that yet. It's all been his unhappiness and sort of grievance-based economics.
What do you think? Having been ambassador to Singapore, I imagine you still have very strong connections over there, and that culture, that the culture, both sort of politically and just in general. But how do you think that we're being perceived in Singapore as this is all sort of coming to fruition? Is it strengthening us or is it weakening us economically?
Well, I think overall it's weakening, because I think there is respect for pushing back against China, because I think, again, per my previous point, there is a view that China is pretty aggressive and they don't want to live in a world that is Chinese dominated. The U.S. is viewed as a fairer, more rules-based partner. So they want the U.S. in the region. So that's sort of the good news about what Donald Trump is doing. The bad news is he's sort of angry at everybody, whether you're playing by the rules or not playing by the rules. And what's interesting is, look, his complaint against Canada just varies. Is it that we have a trade deficit with Canada? Is it that they have cheaper aluminum because they have hydropower? Now, most Americans would say, look, that's good news that we can import cheap aluminum because we use aluminum. We have a lot of jobs that are aluminum dependent. So let's get the cheapest aluminum we can. But he seems to want to pick a fight about that issue. So they are, I think, are unsettled about sort of the global tension and friction that is being generated by the U.S., although they probably like the bit about pushing back against China.
I was going to actually ask you about Canada next. I've read some conflicting report. So yes, I think it was yesterday. It's maybe the day before, but there were some reports that Canada was essentially saying they were going to stop exporting energy into the northern United
Yeah.
States, and that blew up very quickly. But then I started to read some reporting that we really don't actually import that much energy from Canada, and at the end of the day, it may not even matter. Can you tell us a
Yeah, I
little bit
think both
more
those points
about
are
that?
accurate. I think that was the governor of Ontario, the premier of Ontario, their governor of their states, their provinces, and he said, "Look, I'm gonna charge more. They've got power arrangement with some northern U.S. populations, and he said we're going to charge you guys more if you're being mean to us." But your point is also accurate to say I think it's a it's 1% of Michigan population, 1% of New York population, or so. So it's a very small amount. So I don't know what the impact is going to be. Minor. I don't. I'm not surprised that countries, when we impose sanctions on them unilaterally, that they turn around and try to do the same thing. I'm not surprised about this. I know Donald Trump got angry about it, but to say, well, what did you think was going to happen? You punch somebody in the nose. This is not a surprising result. Also, please remember, Canada has their own domestic politics, and they have an election coming up. They have a new prime minister now, Carney. He gets to call the election. But the point is that nationalism can be as powerful in Canada as is in the United States. And if you have U.S. leadership saying foreigners are cheating us and we've got to be mean to them, well, you can be darn sure somebody in Canada is saying the same thing, which is why historically we always look to U.S. presidents sort of calm the waters and try to rise above turmoil and say, let's have lunch. Let's find a solution here. If there's something that's bothering you, or you think we're being unfair, or we think you're being unfair, let's sit down and see if we can come to terms about this. Because this is overwhelmingly, our trade relations with Canada and Mexico are very positive, very productive, enormously beneficial to the U.S. And we normally wouldn't start a conversation by saying, let's pick a fight.
Sure. No, I mean, it's definitely, as not surprised as I was that it's come here, I'm still, it's unsettling. I mean, that's just the nature of it all. And you referenced it earlier that ultimately this much back and forth causes, the private sector to just sort of like freeze in place and wait to see, where we're actually going to go. And listen, if you're a large corporation, you can most likely afford to buy some time. But we focus here mostly on small businesses, and
Mm.
and the smallest from your local dry cleaner with two or three employees up to a
Right.
manufacturing plant. I spoke to someone yesterday who's he has not yet seen his prices increase, but he's waiting for it. He knows it's coming. So what is your message to small business owners that are watching all of the back and forth and really struggling with how to understand it and how to plan for whatever the impact may be?
Well, it's unfortunate. I'm not sure if it directly affects a lot of small businesses. It might be location dependent. If you're on the Canadian border or the Mexican border, it might, or you might. There's always these anomalies where you make a specialty hot sauce. You're not a big business, but for whatever set of reasons, everybody in Canada loves your hot sauce, and it's a cool market. You say, "Gosh, 20% of our sales go north of the border. That's pretty cool. That's pretty impressive." So there's going to be anomalies like that. But I think in general, what we'd say is this is just depressing the overall economy. It's adding taxes and adding a burden to the economy in general. The February inflation numbers came out a few days ago. They weren't bad, but they didn't
Hmm.
include these tariffs. So the March
Right.
numbers are going to be a little worse. So I think what we're going to see is a little bit of downward pressure on the economy for the near term. I'll tell you this, it means the Fed is not going to lower its rates in the near term. It might be
Hmm.
pushing back Fed movement 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, because the Fed has the same view. We can't move in uncertain times. Now, the good case scenario here is Donald Trump is making some symbolic statements. He likes sort of the theater of it. He likes the spotlight, and this is all he's doing. And within a few weeks, it kind of calms down, and whatever some of the original problems were solved. That's the best case scenario, but we don't know. We don't know if he's got an open-ended fist fight going, if this forest fire burns for a while. So I would say hold your powder. I don't. If I were a small business planning expansion, I would just say, can I push this back 90 days and take another look?
Yeah, it's look, to your point, it's part of me just hopes this is just he has a sort of a goal in mind. He'll achieve it and move on, but this could drag on into the summer, which is it's been a wild first month of his administration. I can't even imagine what what June is going to look like. But
Yeah.
I am curious if you sort of have a gut feeling on how Ronald Reagan would have looked at the first however many days it's been. I think is it 50? I've lost count, but of the second Trump administration, and specifically with Doge, because I
Yeah.
think that Reagan, at least it's certainly in my lifetime,
Right.
was really the original advocate
Yeah.
for dramatically reducing
Yeah.
government. But he didn't, he did what he could at the time, but we all know that the Elon Musk of it all is
Yeah.
unprecedented. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious what you
No,
think
Tony, I think
Reagan
your
would have
take.
thought.
I think your take is accurate. That Reagan, I think, was the first of the modern day presidents to sort of blow the whistle on the New Deal and the Great Society. Meaning, for several decades, we had this sort of ongoing expansion of government programs with the view of saying we're helping people. And by the way, it's always true, but as you go along, it's less true. And then there's even government programs that the costs are greater than the benefit, or there's second order effect. There's things such as welfare dependency. Do you say, are these programs really working, or are we actually sort of hurting people, are slowing down movement off welfare into a productive part of the economy? And Reagan spoke very thoroughly on that. And you're right, only limited success in actually curtailing government programs. So it's kind of impressive what Trump is doing domestically. I'd really differentiate some of that domestic budget and personnel moves from the international, where I think his instincts are generally pretty positive. If you can curtail government a bit, if you can reduce the size and scope of government a bit, you're saving a lot of money. And some of these programs really don't work the way they originally intended, or else they've already met their goal, and they really can be reduced a bit. So I'd say keep going. Now, there's probably a more thoughtful way to do it. There's probably a way to do it that isn't reckless, and you want some kind of review process. But I think the logic behind it's a very powerful logic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it'll be also interesting, just, not to make it about politics, but everything's political. So, if they truly can cut the amount of money and just the percentage of, government, and a majority of Americans don't even notice that the cuts
Yeah.
were enacted. I mean, they are just gonna, that they will be able to take that not only into the midterms, but far into the future. The one thing that I keep hearing about, it just, anecdotally, my son's in his 20s. He's a big hiker. Is the national park situation is just totally out of control right now. And it's, if they can get the sort of like the customer facing
Right.
bureaucracy to get it together, I think they really can, they will be able to have a heyday cutting where people really aren't going to notice.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'd love the whole idea of review. Look, I can think I never worked there, but the Small Business Administration.
Hmm.
What is the federal government doing offering loans to small businesses? If we have, what is it, 8,000 banks in the United States? So if all 8,000 banks turn you down, you should then go to the federal government. I said, boy, if you can't find a commercial banking loan, there might be a problem with your proposal. You might want to talk to
Right.
your friends, right? And so why should the federal government be a banker of last resort, right? So I would look at programs like that to say, I'm not sure what role that plays, although at one point it might have played a role.
No, you're absolutely right. That was our CEO, Alfredo Ortiz. He's done a few deep dives into the Small Business Administration, and sort of like what the intent was when it was created versus what they're actually doing in 2025. And we've really lost the plot. And hopefully that will be one of the next areas, because small business owners, they need advocacy, they need assistance, but like you said, they don't need to be kept afloat by the federal government if their business is not working. We're not doing anything except using taxpayer money to stand up something that isn't working in the private sector. And I don't, that's how we got into trouble in the first place.
Well, let me build on that, because something that's always struck me when I worked at the Commerce Department, we have a federal system which is terrific. It allows for diversity, allows for experimentation, but let's do some rankings. let's have a think tank or a university say, how expensive is it and how much time does it take to open up a restaurant in Nashville as opposed to Detroit, as opposed to Houston, as opposed to New York City, and let these localities themselves improve. Every single job application or business application in these cities ought to be online. It ought to be simple. You ought not to have to fill out your name and address 7 different times. There ought to be coordination between the zoning authority and the signage authority and the other bodies that might have to approve it. So if I were mayor of Nashville, I'd say I want anybody to open up a restaurant or a dry cleaners or anything they want to do, and I want them to do it online, and I want it to cost $5. I want as much good news as possible in Nashville, right? And how do we get there? And maybe there's somebody, again, a university that can say, we've got the online kit that you can just copy our kit. And it might be, for all I know, it's the city of Baltimore that's already got this online. Well, let's just put it in every city in the country that can do it so that it's as easy as possible for business to get going, to hire people, to expand, and we get as much good news as possible.
Absolutely. And as the elected leaders in these states, you get the businesses there, they hire the people, your labor, rates are now improving. Like, I mean, there's so much that really it can be built around the small business community. My biggest pet peeve is you hear all of these politicians, they campaign on the backs of the small business owner. They, stand in front of Main Street USA and they share, they swear that they're going to make everything better, and then they get into office and they forget.
Well, Toni, we were chatting at the start of this conversation, I think in a way that is very pertinent to your comment just now, would say, if I were the governor or the mayor, I'd say, look, I want to go to my town, my state. I want to sit down, town hall meeting, make it a few dozen so I can really have a conversation. But to say, what needs to happen in our city for you to have a successful year? What is most important for you? Is it tourism? Is it safe streets? What is the single greatest inhibition right now for you having a good business year? And how can I, as mayor, address that? And I'd want to have these town hall meetings, get that feedback.
Absolutely. And you know what? It really, I think if they did that, they would find out it's really not, as my kids would say, not that deep. It's not that they're not looking for, they don't need like $25 million in like infrastructure improvements. They need a cop on the street corner to make sure that things are safe. And they need a street light, light bulb replaced because it's dark. I mean, it can be things that in the scheme of very large bureaucratic, state governments are very minuscule.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's great to get that feedback. It's great to get street feedback about saying what is more or less working in our town, what's more or less not working, what used to work but isn't working, and how can we just do one step better, get everybody performing a little bit better, get a little more business going, a little more sales going, have a better year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Frank, I could talk to you all day. I don't want to run out of time, though, before we get a chance to talk about your new book, which is coming out soon, entitled Inside the Reagan White House, a front row seat to presidential leadership with lessons for today. Tell everyone about the book.
If I can do this.
Oh,
if I can do
I
this,
love
there
it.
you go. We're launching it next week. Yeah, it's a great story about working with Ronald Reagan, what Ronald Reagan tried to do. It was a lot of fun, worked for a great honor for me to spend 8 years with that man. And people, I think, are going to enjoy this book. So please, if you can.
I can't wait to read it. And I assume we can get it at our favorite bookstores and online?
Yes, support small businesses, absolutely. Or you can go online and go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, any place you want.
All right, wonderful. Well, I will definitely be getting a copy for myself. So thank you very much, Frank, for taking the time to join us today on Main Street Matters. Main Street Matters, absolutely. We're part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast, and we will be back soon with another episode. Goodbye for now.